do in fact now possess the evidence to suggest that the weight of the Greek armor, even the metal armor, would not, of course, be more than 25 pounds. 30 pounds if you must stretch it. That's it. This, of course, starts going down if you start considering that the linothoraces, which would have been worn by a great number of the Athenian troops, are even lighter than that. The only example that we possess is the so-called armor of Philip II in Vergina, and the weight of that is in fact in the 18-pound mark. That's indeed what makes it important. The second, and this is of course another fallacy that we tend to possess, Athenians are not armed in the same way. Okay, just that simple. Heavy armor, the protostates, the promachoi. As you go back, people are armed with lighter, indeed, armors, let alone the weapons. So, with regard to this, and if you took these two parameters into account, yes, it is possible. They can do it. They can indeed pull it off. However, if you ask me, is that what the Athenians did? No, because there's absolutely no reason to do so. The first thing is that the entire strategy of Miltiades would basically go down the drain. The whole idea is for the Athenian army to be able, one way or the other, to meet the Persian front line pretty much at the same moment in itself. Otherwise, the entire thing, especially with troops arriving within, if you like, staggered sort of advance, would practically render the entire battle plan as useless. Second, and this is also quite important, it has to do with the so-called Persian kill zone. Yes, the Athenians should have run if the Persian arrows could reach yardage, or in fact a maximum range of 500 or 600 yards. No, the Persian arrows can only reach maximum range 250, kill zone, as I said, less than 150. Which means that in this case, all the Athenians had to do, and this might be the confusing part about Herodotus' account, use a double march, march all the way down to the actual kill zone, 200, 250 yards, and then run like hell. Either ways, like this, they will still be able to meet the enemy head on and still maintaining unit cohesion. You guys have seen 300? Have you seen when Greek hoplite meets Persian poor hoplite? Holland described it as a pulverizing effect, and he's absolutely right. It would make perfect sense. Already, and having in mind the armor and the offensive weapons that the Persians, the Greeks would have employed, there is really no match. We're talking about long spears that the Greek hoplites could use behind the protection of their shields and be able to deliver either an under thrust or indeed a thrust from the top, which means that regardless of the kind of space that they tended to have, they could still deal a blow. Now, the minute that an actual, and this is again the base of reconstruction, a Greek hoplite pushes down a simple stab of his spear, 92 pounds of force are being generated. 100 joules of kinetic energy. Don't get me into what joules is because I just read it. I just know it as a construction, and that's as far as I go. So around about 100 joules of actual kinetic energy. All this time, you can imagine that a Greek spear can skewer through any opponent. In fact, if they're standing back to back, even two of them, when, all things considered, guys, the only thing you need to render your opponent ineffective, combat ineffective, is a 2-inch incision. You stab him well, and that's pretty much the end for him. You can imagine what would happen when, of course, the heavily armed Greeks started pushing into the Persian front line. Spear, in this case the Greek one, the long one, against the shorter, tiny spear of the Persians. Big bronze and wood shields, with of course themselves a tremendous momentum in their pushing against the wicker shields of the poor Persians. Last but not least, we're talking about linen, quilted linen, and in this case meeting the bronze-clad boys of the Athenian promachoi, at least as far as the central line in itself is concerned. Cast iron versus tempered steel. I can think of other words to use: bloodbath, massacre, brutal. Oh my God, what are we doing here? Let's go back home. Oh my God, these Athenians are hurting. Very briefly, because I already know that I'm probably running out of time, this is the way that the battle actually developed. And in fact, there's absolutely no reason to discount the account of Herodotus, even in the basic or rather prosaic way that he tends to describe it. You guys can see that this is the Greek center. This is where it starts. These are the two elongated two flanks. The Plataeans were placed on the left wing, with indeed the other Athenian on the right wing. The center was occupied by the Leontes and the Antiochis tribe. The Athenians usually placed the center of the line according to their tribes. 10 tribes, one after the other, as of course, like the actual battle line goes. You can see that in fact, when the actual run took place, the three lines, the Athenian battle lines, hit the Persians almost at the same time. I use almost because the center, most likely composing of the heavily armed, the bronze-clad boys, was a little late in joining the party. You can see that the Persian center, much to his credit, and despite the odds, despite the discrepancy in the fighting capability of the two, managed not only to hold the line, but in fact even being capable of pushing the enemy back. We don't know whether this is an actual result, consequence of the battle, or whether it was pre-designed. Some people are now beginning to believe that in fact it was already a trick or ruse devised by Miltiades, so that in this case the flanks on either side would be able to get the Persians in the back. It's a little too much. In fact, what we tend to refer to as an echelon formation does not seem to enter the equation or be perfected until the times of the Theban hegemony, and especially in Epaminondas. But it did work, especially as the Persian center is pushing the Greek back, and you can see the arrow that it follows. This is the time when the two flanks were able to indeed take the much weaker flanks of the Persians, and then simply turn around and be able to hit the center line by its effect. The battle, as it's described, guys, was over in 3 hours, which, considering the stakes, considering the belligerents and so on, is still fairly impressive in its actual shortness. The complete enveloping of the Persian center meant that at some point it basically became another grudge match. At some point it basically became nothing more than the Athenians chasing after or giving pursuit to their enemies. This is the point where most of the Athenian casualties were incurred. They broke ranks, their frenzy was just so intense that the only thing they were looking at is Persian blood. They broke ranks, and as a result they became more impervious to casualties from the retreating Persians. The Persians in this case, sorry about that, the Persians in this case, immediately after the battle, decided to go away. They get on the ships. In this case, the Athenians were capable of only capturing 7 of the enemy ships. There is a story that in this case questions, or in fact says, that once the Persians were once again onto their boats, they tried, through the use of datis and apathermes, to basically try, circumnavigate Attica, hit Athens, while the Athenians were still at Marathon. The story goes, as Karavas realized, or gives it to us, that in fact the Athenians made a quick march all the way from Marathon and down indeed to meet the Persians. Upon the Persians seeing the Athenians being there, all blood Persian, and a really nasty look in their eyes, they decided, we've had enough, we are going to go back home. Now, whether this indeed, all this happened, it's still a matter of debate. There's in fact one source, this is Decius, who tends to denote that Datis was actually slain in battle. Right? Herodotus does not mention anything of the sort, but Datis indeed is. However, whether by himself or with Datis, Apathermes took the remnants of the Persian fleet and of the Persian army, headed back into Asia, seems to have fallen into disfavor after, of course, his defeat, his very convincing defeat at Marathon, and as a result, we tend to drop him, or he drops out of the equation. We don't hear of him again until about 12 to 13 years later, when he's given command of an almost impossible suicidal mission at the very ends or borders of the Persian Empire. Once, of course, the battle was over, this is the actual casualty rate. And there's absolutely no reason to dispute it. 192 Athenians, including, of course, the poor 11 Plataeans, including Arignistus, their leader, was one of the first to indeed fall at Marathon. As some of you have already been at Marathon, you have seen the tomb that was dedicated to the Athenians as commemoration to this event. It was the first time when the Athenians were allowed to be buried at the spot where they fell. Usually any Athenian, war casualty or not, would have been buried at Keramitos, the cemetery of Athens. These guys, for of course their sterling victory over in Marathon, were given special treatment, alongside of course the 11 Plataeans, whose tomb, small or minor indeed mount, is located a little bit to the north west of Marathon, or the battle site itself.